Hi, I'm Alex, your host, and this is No Code World Radio, in which I travel the world to meet the most interesting people in the no-code space. This time, I've decided to embark on a quick train journey to go meet my parents in a small town of the Czech Republic. Over 7 days, I will go through Geneva, Zurich, Vienna, and Prague before reaching Karlovy Vary, my final destination. As you can guess, I've tried to get in touch with no-coders along the way to have a chat with them. I couldn't find anyone in Geneva, but in Zurich, Natasha Buck was nice enough to accept my invitation. She's an automation expert and a Notion ambassador. That's going to be a good talk. This is episode 1 of the second season of the No Code Radio podcast. Hi Natasha, thanks a lot for meeting me here in Zurich. We are in a hair salon to record this, so you will have to tell us why. But we're definitely going to talk about no-code tools, about Notion, about automations, about everything you're doing. That's a subject you're quite a master in, and I'm looking forward to talk about this with you. First of all, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your background.
Yes, I'd love to. Thanks for having me and coming to Zurich. A little bit about me. I have originally made an apprenticeship in graphic design, but not design itself, but the production of graphic medium. And that was before Photoshop. So I did everything manually on the light table. Okay. With chemicals we had to treat the films that would represent the printing colors, the 4 printing colors, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. These were films. And you would treat them with chemicals in order to increase color or decrease color. And also that was the time where photographers would still take pictures with dias, these small little images. Mm-hmm. And then if there was a tiny little dust piece on it, and you would increase that to an even A4 print ad, that little dust piece became really big. So I had to do retouching of that, and that meant I had to really gently scratch the surface of these foils and not to hurt the carrying medium where the area that was representing the printing and the transparent area was the non-printing area, and also as well the carrying medium, because when you would hurt that and you would copy this from a positive to negative or vice versa, it would increase because this area, because the light would break in there. So you would have a diffusion of light because you scratched the surface too much. And you had to do it with binoculars, like really small binoculars, and know how to sharpen your tools.
Yeah, and precisely use them.
Yes, yes.
Wow.
Yes, so we were trained to look at foils that were just black area and transparent area, look at all the 4 printing foils, and then define and say by heart what kind of color it was. So just seeing pixels, we needed to be able to say what kind of a color it was.
Okay, wow. It's funny because we talk a lot, about automations, about doing things manually, like copy paste, but it's still always like you're virtual, but you're doing by hand. But what you're saying is like doing by hand, like literally.
Yes.
Like really. Yeah.
Yes. Really, like I made a 4-year apprenticeship in a very manual job that started to exist in midterm. So there was a big crisis in the market. And I would say I became an early victim of digitalization before it even was called like that. So after the 4 year of my apprenticeship, I didn't find a job because everyone was asking for Photoshop knowledge, which I didn't have. So I never worked on that job since then.
Okay. You didn't learn Photoshop and you...
I did.
Okay, eventually, but not at that time.
Not on the job. I just learned it because I liked it.
Okay.
I was curious, and I gotten really good in Photoshop 1.1, is 2.0, to get rid of eyeshadows, for example. And I later then worked in a office as a sort of secretary. there. Well, it was the business of my father, and he was back then an Apple dealer, and that was quite a thing to be, because you didn't get that recognition. It was like a certification process, and when he got it, he was really proud. So I grew up with Mac. I worked on the Apple IIe.
Okay, nice.
I would say, well, I can call myself a digital native also before the word existed. And what I really liked about working with my father is that he didn't have an application that would cover a CRM, shipping slips, invoicing, or even ordering from the suppliers. So he developed something himself. We were a 3-people company, and that was all made in FileMaker.
Okay.
Yeah. And I did the printing materials, so that's why I was able to learn Photoshop and Quark Express, which is now something like...
Does it still exist, you think?
I don't know. And also worked with PageMaker, by the way.
Okay. Because I think Quark Express now is like InDesign style. I mean, it's like for the publishing, like... Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
And... for a long time, I didn't use, for example, Illustrator, but I also taught that myself as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I really liked about small companies is that when I worked with the FileMaker application, I would need to process something from an administrative or secretarial point of view. I would go to the guy and say, yeah, I need an extra field for XYZ. And he would just go into it, switch to the layout mode, create a new property there, or you call it Notion property. There it's called field. And slap it into the layout, maybe also slap it onto the layout that goes into printing or was used in printing scripts. And that was it.
Can you explain maybe a little bit what's FileMaker for those who don't know? Because we can say, I think, I've heard that also at some conferences, that it's one of the first no-code tools, like literally.
Yes. FileMaker was created by Claris, and it was also once owned by Apple. Okay. And for a long time, it was recognized or seen as a Mac-only software. You can, to all the listeners coming from a Notion universe, imagine Notion with integrated scripts, but with not predefined graphical or UX as we have. So you could design your own UX and define which UX is being targeted when you want to print something out. And also imagine you could have a database model that is not as limited as today. You can have a grandmother, mother-daughter connection, and that even have that done automatically based on a button that you click, and there's a script behind it who does the linking automatically between the databases.
It's I've never used it. I heard a lot about it. I think there is a connection with an ancestry connection with Notion, but I would say also with Airtable. I think maybe Airtable is closer, but it's missing, and it's missing really. A lot of people are asking for it in Airtable. That was in FileMaker, this UX part that you're saying, like you could build interfaces. And what's interesting, what you're mentioning, is that I think at that time, like usually the end goal of all this was to print something, or not always?
Not solely. In the beginning, it was to contain data in it. Yeah. So you can have sophisticated CRMs, and whatever you need, you could build it with it.
But was it like the interface you would build? People, were they using it like a CRM that we would say every day? Or were they doing actions that would lead into printing, I don't know, invoices and things like that? Or maybe both, I don't know.
Both. It really depends on how it was programmed.
Okay.
A normal user, normally you wouldn't give them access that they can build their own scripts.
Okay.
And you wouldn't give them access to layouts. So
there was several levels of...
Yes, you can really narrowly define the access levels, even breaking it down per record, which you can't do in Notion.
Not yet, maybe one
Not
day.
yet. I
Not
really hope
in Airtable
for that.
either, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I really hope for that. And I would say, if you are a company who wants to own the data and have all the data on your own servers, and you can afford it, then Notion might be a great MVP. And then from there, develop something that you own. And I think that may be the case for lawyers or small insurance companies or VC funds who want to make sure that stuff can be hacked. But that also means you have to run it on your servers and then have their security protocol on it.
Yeah. Do you think, I mean, I know FileMaker still exists, but do you think there is still a lot of companies that use it?
I do think so, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think ERPs, some people who weren't happy with bookkeeping systems. I mean, now you have bookkeeping systems which are really great. You can do invoicing out of it, stuff like that. But not many years ago, it was more reserved for professional bookkeepers, people who are into numbers, but not for business owners.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like you really grew up in this Apple environment. Have you ever tried Microsoft Access? That is, like, I would say, the competitor of FileMaker.
It is a competitor, definitely. I've never tried really. I think I've once made a lame attempt. Then I was like, oh, that's too complicated.
Yeah.
Or maybe I just thought the learning curve is too steep. Why bother?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
But I always was keen in reading comparisons and feel a bit superior when FileMaker won the comparison. Because what I understood is that you in FileMaker, you when you create an entity, it automatically creates a default layout. So you don't have to do it from scratch, whereas in Access you need to have that.
Yeah, I feel like, well, I mean, I've never really used Access, really, but I feel like on the UX, like interface part, it probably wasn't as developed as FileMaker. But I don't know, I've only seen it used as a database, more something like Airtable, I would say. But, okay. No, it's interesting. Yeah. It's really...
And also, something to add to FileMaker, what I think is a great feature, and I hope Notion also has something, or will come up with something like this, is that the soon you had two tables, FileMaker would realize if there was a one-to-many or a many-to-many connection, and then you had a third tab where you would see a visual representation of the database model. And FileMaker would do that automatically, that you would see which properties were linked with each other and what kind of relation they would have, a one-to-one, a one-to-many, many-to-many, which is really cool. And you can print it out.
Yeah.
So Notion, I also want that.
Yeah, in terms of documentation, I think it's great.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
There's an app for Airtable that does that, actually. But it doesn't show, unfortunately, it shows the relations, but not if it's one-to-many or many-to-many, and there's no, but hopefully also that will come to...
And do you also see which, not only table, but also which properties or columns are targeted?
No, because in Airtable you don't have this notion. No, there's nothing. There's not. It's no equivalent. You just link to databases, but then all the fields are, like you can make lookups and things like that.
So you don't define a key between the two.
It's kind of implied.
Okay.
So
because in FileMaker you need to do that.
Yeah, you would need that in a traditional. Relational database. But that's one of the things where Notion and Airtable choose to abstract, I think, some parts. And it's exactly like in Notion. You can have those relations, but they just they link tables together, and then you can have those roll-ups and lookups. But yeah, it's pretty much the same in Airtable.
Did you see in Notion this formula where you can now embed the ID of a record?
The
ID of a record.
In Notion? No, I haven't seen that actually.
Because I'm curious if that will make automations easier, or if that is kind of the basis or new layer to make more automations.
Actually, it's interesting. I didn't know there was that. There is something like this in Airtable, but it confuses people a lot.
Ah, okay.
It's not very used for what I've seen, and it's more used by technical people. And but it's interesting because sometimes, and maybe you can tell me for you, but sometimes what I can see, like when we train people, developers who are used to work with, SQL databases, they always try to do this, look for the IDs and use that to link and in Airtable, you don't have to do that. And if you try to do it, then it's going to mess things up. And so it's interesting sometimes how beginners can use better a tool because they don't have the background, So I don't know if you find this.
Something like we have always done it like this here, and then you assume you have to apply this to a new environment as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, and that's the advantage of a beginner. I was looking in Notion early on for an ID, but more with the thinking behind it. If I can target the ID, that means a great potential for bots and automations, but not because I had a particular use case.
Okay. So, tell us how you arrived in all this like kind of Notion automation field. What was the lead between?
Sure. After I worked with my father, I worked at different other jobs, and then later self-taught myself FileMaker because it was also a secretarial position and very repetitive of certain tasks. And I noticed that I find these tasks rather boring. And because of that, I did more mistakes. And then I asked myself, why can't I just make a database out of it and prevent myself from doing mistakes? And maybe I also have to add that I was and still am bad with numbers. Numbers sort of glitch in my head. I always have to memorize them visually and they sort of morph. I don't know if that's a form of dyslexia, which is called dyscalculia, I think.
Yeah.
So teaching myself FileMaker was a really huge hurdle for me to overcome mentally as well. Because what we shouldn't forget is that, and I think that's the advantage to Notion to a certain extent, is that in order to program something and to automate something, you require the words for it. So often I had an intuitive understanding that this should be doable, but if you don't know how to search for it, because I bought a book in German about it, which was like this thick. I'm showing now 7 centimeters. and I knew that knowledge was in the book, but I didn't know how to look it up. So it's also coding and no coding. I would say it's still programming.
Yes.
You have to think in an abstract matter. And also with it comes a language. And when I couldn't figure it out immediately, or it took rather some time, I always thought I'm stupid. So that's just the angle where I'm coming from. And then later I became an assistant at the Swiss Stock Exchange, and they had a marketing team that had one spreadsheet, which was a total mess. They wanted to track in one sheet contacts and meetings, which is a one-to-many connection, which is not doable in an Excel spreadsheet. And I at night try to figure out if I can program that, because I was new to the finance industry, and that was also a means for me to understand it.
Were you using a lot of Excel and spreadsheets before that?
No. I did some proper Word and Excel training at that secretarial job where I started to teach myself FileMaker.
Okay.
So I couldn't do many cross-references. I had the user experience when I worked with my father, and I looked over the shoulder of how the guy quickly implemented something. So I knew it was doable, but getting there was really, really difficult. But I'm someone who's has sometimes a kind of a pit bull mindset, and I'm just bite into it and try to figure it out.
No, it's interesting because you knew about like databases and relational databases before kind of using Excel.
Yes.
Which is the opposite of most people. And a lot of people are using Excel and spreadsheets, Google Sheets, whatever, as databases. And so it's hard for them afterwards to learn how to unlearn this because a spreadsheet is not a database and it can do a lot of things that are great and a lot of things that are not. So I feel like maybe you kind of skipped that step but maybe also that didn't help learning Excel. I don't know.
Yes, I think my thinking is very visual and three-dimensional. So when I was thinking about these database tables, I always imagined a mobile. This thing you hang over children's bed.
Yeah.
But I would say a database is a more complex mobile. And I always had in mind that there has to be a balance and not an overweight of something. And then also realized, or I had an affinity of realizing this is a redundancy that I'm entering. So what's the point of having a redundancy? Then I realized, I can make another table in order to prevent that redundancy, because I always came from that angle, realizing if I enter something twice or three times, there's a risk of me doing a mistake because the next time I wouldn't have it in my mind, because I'm bad at memorizing. That's why I build systems that I really, really hardly focus on building something and make sure it works really well, and then I can relax and I delegate everything to the system.
That's a really good mindset, I think, for the building, internal tools and.
Thanks. So I thought in this mobile dimension, and this is how I envisioned database models before I knew it's called database model. And because I've built this CRM at the Swiss Stock Exchange for that marketing team, which was called New Market. That was before the IT bubble burst. Before 9/11, I was at the Swiss Stock Exchange where we saw the Twin Towers on the big screen. That was the reason that one day the IT department was standing in our office with a very serene, or how do you say that? With a face that I knew something was wrong because I developed something without them consulting. Yeah. I just did it at home because I saw that I had access to the stuff through repository all users had. And I saw, someone is using FileMaker, so I can install it on my machine. And if I can install it on my machine at work, I can install it that was Windows there. Yeah. And I can install it at home and develop it there and then carry everything on a USB stick to work.
You started Shadow IT very early.
Yes, without even knowing that this is a word. So they were here and they were like two people, a really tall guy and a very short Japanese woman, and with a very serious face. And they said, "You've been developing a system." And I was like, "Yes, I did." And then I said, "Yeah, I can demo it to you, because in the meantime, my boss had supported that software. We purchased the server. I mean, IT was involved in purchasing the server and installing it. Yeah, they were not completely unknowledgeable, but because of this, the CEO signed the purchase request. they were like, okay, if the big boss says yes, we have to comply. Yeah. And then we implemented in Zurich and in the Geneva team. So all the marketing activities could be entered. So I demoed it to them and they asked me how long it took me. And I was like, yeah, I always did it in the evenings and on my weekends. Sorry, I don't know. And he said, yeah, guess. And I said, yeah, maybe 2-3 weeks. And he had like big eyes in shock and he couldn't believe. So apparently I was even quick. And also, I must say, at work, that boss, which was then really supportive, wasn't in the beginning. In the beginning, he said, "Yeah, we have so many databases, Natasha, figure them out." And I quickly, even within my 3 months trial period on that job, I knew many other softwares, and I really quickly and I understood them even better. So I could tell people, for this data, it's there, but if you want to have it on, if you want that piece of information about same listed companies on the stock exchange, you have to go into this database. So I understood even the gap. So I showed them, I demoed my my shadow database. And they said that they are having a company-wide CRM project going on. And they first wanted to have a better ticketing system for their development department. And that time, the Swiss Stock Exchange was actually already an IT company. It was not there was no trading floor anymore. We were the first digital stock exchange.
Okay.
So 2/3 of the staff or employees of the Swiss Stock Exchange were IT people. Business was rather small. So they had many processes not really properly covered. If they had a ticket coming in, they just relied on emails. And if someone wasn't here or not very reliable or drowning in work, stuff would just fall between the cracks. So they started to first analyze all the processes, and by pulling the cord of the process, they landed in business, and then with me. And the project manager asked me, Natasha, would you like to become part in the project? And I said, yeah, sure. And are you willing to demote your database? And I said, yeah, sure. If it's at least as good as what I've made, no problem. And then I became member of the pre-steering committee, which was just right below the management. And the funny thing is, I was really young there. The others did not have. They either were from business, didn't talk IT, or you had IT people. But I was kind of the sort of missing link, which is called today a business analyst. But I didn't know what that role was called. And then they did, I think, a selection of different CRMs and decided to go with Siebel by Oracle. We had some IBM consultants in-house to look at all the data sources and figuring out what's the structure. And I remember it's Friday at 5:00, we were sitting in a container because at the same time, construction was going on at the Swiss Stock Exchange. So some of the teams were seated outside on the street in containers.
It's always the IT teams that gets
yes, but these were the consultants. They were outsourced.
Okay. So they were literally out.
Yeah. And I remember with another woman from marketing, we were banging heads together with these consultants about database models. And because I learned about all the other databases, I could easily bring up examples why we needed a database model where you had company person one-to-many, and then you would have person-to-many addresses, because some people had several email addresses and wanted to have certain stuff to that email address and other stuff to this email address. But then if you have shipping physical stuff to a third address. And then also companies, even if they're bigger ones, they had an official address, headquarter address, but then this team was in this address. So also even company had one too many addresses. Yeah. So this database model was also influenced by me.
Yeah.
And that was just because I knew the business case. Yeah.
It's interesting. It's really showing how data modeling is important. It's one of the things I think we don't talk enough in the no-code community. There is kind of this thing that, Airtable, Notions are very used, very popular tools, but a lot of people are not using them properly, and I say that with, like not any judgment. It's because it's hard, like you told us, like really your whole story, and it's interesting how you have this understanding and knowledge about data modeling, and we understand why, but you can imagine all the people who don't have this background and that they don't know, and then they're confused. And then if they want to put several addresses, they will make columns. They don't even know it's fields or properties, it's like columns
or nodes.
And then it's like it's not the great way and the best way to do it. It's I think it's very inspiring, I would say.
Thank you. I mean, but it's also a pain for some of my clients when I work as a Notion consultant, is that when they write to me and say, "Yeah, I just need a quick checkbox there," and I'm holding against it, saying, "Let's do a select property out of it, and if you need more values, we just dump it in there, because when we do for each use case a checkbox, you just lose oversight. Why was that field there for?" Because also I think it's a you can quickly build something cool in Notion, but it's difficult to document.
Yeah, and to maintain the run.
Yes. I started to document filters with screenshots because I thought, and the documentation is in the workspace of my client, because I thought, whenever I have to reconstruct a filter for even me, sometimes I would
of course
play around and forget what I have done.
Yeah.
So, and even if I'm not on the project with the client anymore and they need maintenance or something additional, I can refer back to this. And knowing why we have decided to make this property is really, really helpful in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's what yes.
Documentation is also something we don't talk about enough in the no-code space, I think.
And also, I think in terms of database modeling, is that I see people just having one database where they just put everything in there and then just link within the database. And I find it an interesting approach. I certainly wouldn't do it. Because at the same time, I could not tell you why I wouldn't use it like that. Because maybe that's my blindness now, that I did not even consider packing everything into one database and just linking within it. And now I'm wondering, why not? Even though I wouldn't do it, what's the advantage or disadvantage for it? I just have a not very rational reaction that I shouldn't do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's not always one way to do it. That's also what's interesting. Like one business case you can model into several ways sometimes. There's usually one way that is the good one, or like the most
best practice.
Yeah, exactly. That would, the experts would do, and then maybe there is one way that would be acceptable, and then there's another way that's the wrong way. But then sometimes there's two ways that are totally acceptable. But yeah, I think it's very interesting.
Maybe the question that needs to be asked is, why do people decide to have everything in one database, in Notion now in particular? Maybe that is the more interesting question to answer. Where are they coming from that they think that is a better solution for them, and understand that better?
I want to ask you another question, actually. I would the other way, and then so maybe we can get to what you're doing now and your clients and the projects you're working on. But since we're on this topic, how do you decide, like the model you want to use on a business case? What's your mental process, or what's your not just mental, but also maybe with your client?
Oh,
like I come to you with a project. How are you going to decide? And when I ask you that, I think it's interesting how you would recommend to someone to do.
What I notice is that clients do not question my database model. We don't even talk about it. They just want to have something that works for them.
Sure.
And what I find really interesting is that when they start to talk with me what they need, in the back of my mind, I have the mobile effect again. I immediately see the one-to-many connections in the back of my mind. That drawing just happens straight away.
But do you analyze, I guess, what you're doing in your mind, like analyzing what are the entities involved in the project, or is that, or I don't know, is it just like coming directly to you? When they talk, of course I take notes, and I have already an idea what they have, and I pair with my experience is that mostly people have the same problems with the same functions. Mostly it's either CRM, project and task management. I guess that's where the experience comes.
Yes, exactly.
In. It's like you most likely already been through this typical use case.
You always have about 4 to 5 main areas where problems arise. And what I find difficult, or I have a learning curve to take, is that I have to give clients more time in explaining why I come to this solution, and at the same time I shouldn't do that too early, although I see it very quickly. I think having maybe an early prototype helps for them to make it more understandable.
Yeah.
If I just talk to them with relational database and one-to-many, that's like technical crap talk. Yeah. It's like when I go to the hairdresser where we are at now, is that what kind of a color you want? And I would just say as my client, I just want to look good.
Yeah.
How you get there, I don't care. But what I see with database modeling is that sometimes clients have a very unique use case that requires a complex database model, but then it's hard for them to understand that database model and consequently hard for them to navigate. And they would then say, oh, that's too complicated or too many clicks, which I understand, of course. And they have a problem that that I would need to teach and bring people to a certain level of database modeling or database model understanding, so that they can better anticipate how they will help their future self when they do that additional click. Because Notion isn't opinionated as other systems. But the reason why these clients come to me is because opinionated systems do not work for them because their use case is too unique.
Yeah.
So it's like a snail biting its tail, sort of, to speak. Yeah. And I find that now an interesting challenge in communicating this very early on to a client when I see it goes into that direction.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about your clients? What type of clients do you have? What do you want to address, and what do you do for them?
Mostly these are clients who started somewhere, and suddenly the volume of work got too big.
So you would say like the primary case would be helping them scale their activity?
Yes, I would say so. And it requires process analysis always. And I do think that's most often overseen by clients. I think clients always assume that they have a tool problem. And I think it's not a client problem, it's a human problem, that we are better at recognizing problems that are outside of us first.
Yes. Yeah.
Because a tool problem is an outside problem, whereas a process problem is inside. And I would say realizing that the tool isn't working for you is the first step. And now I'm trying to help them understand that it's both.
Yeah. And finding the right tool involves maybe first helping them with defining the right process.
And requirements. Sometimes they're very abstract, depending on... depending certain industries attract certain characters, I would say.
Yeah. Right.
But I would claim that I could talk IT as much as I can talk with people. Yeah, that's why I think that makes me business analyst, that I can talk business and analyze.
Yeah, yeah, and the tool is just part of the solution, but it's not.
Yes, it's a part. It's a piece in the mosaic.
Yeah.
But I would say the most pieces in the mosaic are company specific.
It's interesting because there's also, so we're evolving in this no-code space, no-code community. People are very passionate about tools, discussing them all day and the features of the tools. But then when it comes to professionally use those tools, I think it's really kind of overlooked that, tool is the end of the process. But then first, you have to help understand the client problems, helping them define how they solve the problems, and then in the end you implement the solution. And so when it comes to the solution, once you've done all this like business analysis and data modeling, so you work mostly on Notion?
Currently, yes, because Notion is also my tool of choice.
Okay.
But I'm in the service for the client. If it doesn't serve the client, I will help them find another tool that reflects or helps them better reflect their processes. Because I think my mission is to improve their lives and not bring in a tool. Because that would just, I don't like that, because in general that it would be like sort of selling us a false solution. Yeah. Personally, I'm like that I'm always trying to dig down to the root of a problem. And by just selling them a tool, I think I did not really dig deep enough.
Okay. And once let's say you set up a system in Notion for your client, do you train them to be autonomous? Is it a mix, like you maintain it for them, or what's the kind of, once it's set up, how do you keep working with them?
I have noticed that clients always ask the same questions, how to use Notion. So I've built a Notion basic course in German.
Okay, cool.
Which is about 36 lessons now.
Okay.
And consulting clients get access to that for free. It's part of the package.
Okay. But do you also sell this?
Yes, separately as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I first of all, I don't want to repeat myself. I want to maintain the same quality. And also now I'm thinking about making it a prerequisitive or
requirement.
A requirement, better word.
Prerequisite.
Yes, exactly that word. I'm not repeating it.
It's hard to say.
A requirement that they go through it first.
Before working with you?
Yeah.
Or before using the solution?
Before, ideally, or when we first look at if they come and want immediately Notion, I would challenge them first to figure out why they came to the solution that Notion is the right solution for them. And then I want them to go through the course, because you can do so much with it, and just knowing how to navigate it and use little tricks and that make your life easier. Just reminders, how can you remind yourself and what kind of possibilities of different reminders. It's such a handy tool for people to know, and I don't feel like repeating myself. And if they're planning, and if they are anyway have a problem with volume of work, they will have staff, be it permanent or freelancers, and they also need to be trained. And depending on the freelancers, some of them are really glad that I can learn something new. Cool, yeah.
No, it's interesting because it could be a way to also filter the bad clients. Exactly. People who are too kind of lazy. Get involved in a little bit. Okay, now it's interesting. It's the first time I hear something like that. I think it's great.
Yes, because I think I just updated my sales page for that course, and the entry title is something. I mean, it's in German, but in English, you would say you can. It's Notion is simple to learn, but not easy to use.
It's true. I think I don't know if you will agree, but I think a lot of people believe it's easy to use because, you open a Notion page, you can type in straight away, but they miss, on the real use and the database, of course. This is quite difficult to use properly, but then also usually on the, command, like there is several ways. It's such a flexible tool, as you were saying. There are several ways to use it, and to use it properly, it's a lot more difficult than people think it is. And I think it's great because it embarks a lot of people in Notion easily. But then that's why we also do training for Notion, because there is so much to learn if you want to use it properly. And I think it's interesting, and that brings me actually to a question. Because I can imagine that, there is such a hype around Notion that I'm sure a lot of people come to you and say, we want Notion for this, for that. When are the cases? Do you have some example in mind where Notion is the right solution for what your clients want to do?
Yes, as previously mentioned, is that if you have users who are not as dedicated in using the system as you and I are, because some people just don't want to invest any time in understanding how they have to connect the databases. I mean, of course, you can have filter view that makes that a bit easier, but the sooner you have an additional connection to another database, yes, it might require many clicks, and they just don't like that many clicks. And I do think people confuse simple with easy, and then still have the mindset of opinionated systems, and combine that with a weak leadership, or the leadership who is in a weakening position depending on how the business is evolving, then it's really difficult to implement a complex Notion system with users who are mainly maybe freelancers, who are not as dedicated or understandable. Then it requires a lot of management, and enforcement, maybe in some sort of way.
Yeah.
And you cannot, as a leader, if you are not supported by your leadership, implement something or solve a problem when you don't have the power behind your back, plus the combination with the users and many clicks, as they say. Yeah, I would say other solutions might be Airtable or FileMaker, but then with FileMaker it's a budget question. With Airtable, then they think, it's too much like Excel. And then if people presume or see it as too much like Excel, the diligence of really sticking to the column intent, first name is really meant for first names and nothing else. But because you have users like this, and it's not even a matter or a question of age, yeah. It's just how diligent they are. There is definitely limitation, and it's not a tool question then, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. Well, I mean, this was all very interesting. I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but I have a few more questions. Maybe one last question about how you work. If you want to tell us a little bit more about your own ops, I would say. I don't know if you have, so I guess you use Notion probably for your activity. I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit about how you work, let's say.
You mean like how I structure my days, or?
Yeah, it can be. I would say maybe
my
from
work is that with clients,
from maybe a tool perspective, but or like your own process. I don't know. If you have maybe one interesting process, maybe it's the invoicing or the project management or.
Well, in terms of bookkeeping and invoicing, and finance, nothing of that I do in Notion.
Okay.
Because for that I use dedicated softwares.
Yeah.
I have also, after that 4-year apprenticeship, I've made a commercial apprenticeship additionally on top of that, and we have bookkeeping in it, so I have a good understanding of bookkeeping.
Okay, yeah.
So I don't see the point of having or doing an invoice in Notion, and then because you have to make an entry in my bookkeeping system. And that delegating this to a bookkeeper or to an assistant, I just think I create an additional work, which is not necessary if I do it from the beginning on. What are other interesting processes I use? Maybe I can talk about an interesting use case that not many know maybe yet, is that when I hold presentations, be it online or live, is that I embed QR codes in my slides and ask people to scan it with their mobiles. First of all, it's the idea, the thinking behind it, that people's attention can wander off, and everyone is holding their mobiles in their hands. So if I'm giving them the permission, it's a nice thing, and I can ask questions. And the QR code goes into a tally form. I've also seen that you've interviewed Mary from Tally Form, right? Yeah. That goes to a tally form, and that one is then connected with the Notion database.
Okay.
And that Notion database is particularly made or in relation to the presentation. So I have a marketing section where that is then all in. And what I think in particular, where I think it's really handy, is when you do a live stage, you can even have a banner with your QR code that people can get in touch with you. So it's not on a slide. That will not be visible anymore. If you do an online presentation like in Zoom, most often people just share a link in the chat. But if you then upload a recording of something...
Yeah, you lose the chat.
Exactly. But if you have a slide, it's still there.
Okay, that's interesting, yeah.
And then combine this with a UTM code. So, for example, I would target my domain with a fake sub-page, which is then... And I put a redirect to it. That redirect is then going to the tally form. and to entry that into my Notion. So I would also see how many hits I get on that particular event.
Even if it's not, even if they don't answer the form.
Exactly.
Just accessing.
Yes.
Yeah, for people who don't know, the UTM is like a parameter in the URL that's used for the analytics and tracking and things like that.
Exactly. Or if you don't even need the UTM code, you just can have, if you have your own domain / anything.
Yeah.
Like what I do mostly is my domain, natashabuck.com / and then today's date with year - month - day.
Okay.
Which I know is unique. I won't use it at any other time in the future. And I would put a redirect on it, and I can look into my plugin and look at the redirects, and I have the same number then.
Okay. That's interesting. It's a good trick.
Yes, that's maybe a process I thought is interesting to know.
Yeah. Do you use any automation tools?
Yes, I use Automate and Zapier.
Were you happy that Notion bought Automate? Were you using Automate before?
Yes.
Yeah.
I looked into Zapier, Automate, and Integromat, and liked Automate the best compared to pricing. Also, I mean, just for user experience, I think Zapier is really good. But in terms of balancing it with pricing, I think it's a really good deal. And when I saw the announcement, I was really impressed, and I think some interesting development will come from that corner.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. I'm quite looking forward also to see what they're going to do with it.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I also, before that, when in May the API came out, that was also the moment where I realized, automation business is actually quite lucrative.
Yeah, of course.
So having this under the hood from a Notion perspective, I think that's strategically seen a very clever move.
Yeah. I guess for your activity, when you have to digitalize processes, so there is this whole database thing that we've talked a lot about, but then there's usually also an automation part of it, or can be at least, to help make the process maybe move from one step to the other, or make some actions automatically when the process goes on. So
yeah, and if it's then really tailor-made to your own product, such as Notion, I think then also these automations become really stable.
Yeah. No, I think it's they were missing this. I mean, the API solved a little bit of this, but still, first, a lot of people don't know how to use APIs. The good thing is, like, a lot of tools then integrated the APIs, like Tally, for instance. They made it like so you don't have to bother with the API part.
Yeah, great move.
They will go, so that was really cool.
I mean, neither did I know what an API was. I mean, abstract, yes, but never programmed something like this.
Yeah, no, it's quite technical, but I think it's going to be a requirement also for a lot of people to kind of understand at least the big picture. Well, I mean, we've talked a lot about most of the things I have in my questions. I just have a few questions about Zurich, maybe, and Switzerland, maybe a little bit. What can you tell us about let's say the Notion community in Switzerland? Is there? So I think you're a Notion ambassador.
Yes.
Are you organizing meetups, or how is it working? I mean, it's been quite complicated with the COVID also, I guess, but what's the status here of the community?
I've created a meetup originally called Notion Switzerland or Schweiz even, and then later changed it to Notion of Deutsch to include also Germany and Austria. Yeah. And also because I became a admin on the Facebook group Notion auf Deutsch, which was created by Theresa Ungerberg.
Okay.
Well, her last name changed. She married. So sorry.
You know, it's funny. I have a small thing. Sorry to interrupt, but in France, so there was a Facebook group, and then they created a community around a Discord that was called Notion France or France. I don't know. It's half the English way. Notion France, let's say. So that's how they say it in French. But then they changed their name actually, and now it's called Notion in French. So it's interesting that you made the same move.
So maybe that Notion understands what it is about. I don't know.
I think they were not happy with the fact that, I mean, Notion, like this group of people, they wanted to include, Canada, Belgium, some parts of Switzerland as well.
Yes, of course.
And they felt like, if we're talking about Notion France, quite confused with when I have to say it.
Sure.
And so I think it's interesting that you kind of had the same process, because it makes sense. Switzerland is like there's all those languages, and I guess in Zurich it's more the German, right? German,
yes, but also I think the Swiss. I can only talk now for the Swiss that talk German, in particular. In Zurich, we're very used to talk English, and you could live here as a foreigner, not needing to learn the language at all for ages. I mean, we make it people really easy to stay with their English. And I do think we talked that about a lot among the German-speaking ambassadors, is that where is the line happening? Is it country-specific or is it language-specific? And I do think it's language-specific. I remember we had a live stream where Camille Blanchon, who's a Notion ambassador, presented.
She is one of the creators of the French
yes, exactly.
community. Yeah.
She was talking about her experience, how she built the community, and there she mentioned that yes, it's open for everyone, because we had someone in the chat who lives in Switzerland but in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, and was surprised to know that she also can join there. So that's really nice, and that shows that. And also I see that with clients, is that some of the clients really would love to have Notion in German or in their language of choice. And I think it's a selling factor as well when they can talk with a consultant in their preferred language. Yeah.
Do you know if there are plans that the software Notion itself is going to be translated in German?
I do hope so, because when there was this Block event, Ian Zawak announced that next language will apparently French.
I think so, apparently.
So I concluded German will be next.
Well, yeah, I hope so.
So that's what I've concluded, because UK doesn't need an extra English, I think. Then I think Spanish is also something good, because Latin America is a really big market. Portuguese, because with Portugal and Brazil.
But I think, maybe what I'm wondering is like the thing in Germany, or as you were saying here also, is that mostly people speak quite good English, for what I know, in Germany or in Switzerland. And so, I guess maybe in terms of prioritizing for Notion, maybe they could say, okay, we'll do German later, because we already know that we have a lot of people that can use it in English.
Yes.
Which is not necessarily the case in France, for instance. But as you said, I totally agree that some people want to use it in their own language.
That's the question. That's an interesting question to ask, is that do native French-speaking people prefer French, and is their English level not as high as German-speaking people?
I can tell you. I can answer that question.
I assume so, but I can be biased. So
no, it's the case, and there is the two things. Like as you said, there is one, the general level of English in French is not as good as Germany, for instance, and also, and it's not necessarily linked. People in France prefer, it's a selling point really, to have something in their own language. there is this strong kind of attachment to the
So not
language.
computer, but l'ordinateur.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and Canada also has this, Quebec.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, so if you take the two factors, it's good to have a software in.
I would say for the Germans, they really would love to have it in German.
Yeah.
Because I've seen I had clients who said they prefer that even the labeling, even now the navigation is English, but they would love to have their databases labeled in German. And they are realized that causes friction for some people. Yeah. The language is too far away. Whereas for me, because I grew up maybe side track to how I grew up, because I grew up in Libya, I had friends from Belgium, so I talked French, and I had a friend from England, so I talked English, and then I had a friend from Germany, so I talked German with her. And my neighbors, the neighbor or the house owners' girls taught me Arabic. And my parents decided not to talk Swiss German with me, which would have meant the fifth language, because that poor kid has already 4 languages. Maybe that's the reason why I can quickly interchange between German and English. And sometimes even my Notion space is mixed with English and German, because sometimes I just pick the English word because it's shorter.
Yeah, and maybe you don't even really see it.
Yes, yes, I would say so. And I've seen with client work that for them it's friction. And even in other... And that's for quite some time that I would watch content in English or BBC One, on television, just to practice English. And then also when I talk Swiss German, I use English expressions because I find they are quick to say. And then people are like, "Are you Swiss?" I said, "Yes, I just use English words." But I do this mix and match of words anyway. There are expressions in Swiss German from the dialect, which I think is, if it's from not the dialect from Zurich, where I live, but it sounds nicer and it's from another area of Switzerland, I use that one because I just find it sounds nicer or I can say it quicker. So I have sort of my... multilingual language, I would say. And I noticed that not everyone is like this. Yeah.
No, of course. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, I mean, we've covered a lot of this. I have one last question. What's your favorite thing to do in Zurich? Or one thing you would recommend for people to do?
Yes. Now, since it's autumn, I highly recommend to people to go to the cemetery called Zielfeld.
Okay.
It's not only a active cemetery, but also they kept stones who were made with a particular craftsmanship. And because normally the tradition is here, I think after 10 or 20 years, they dissolve the grave,
Okay.
And then let it rest until, So the stones do not stay there forever. And also what's very particular is that this cemetery has a collection of trees. So now in autumn, you see different shades of yellow and orange because you have a different array of trees. So they also have a tree collection. That one is living.
Okay, nice.
The rest is rather inactive. And then another thing I recommend is taking it's sort of a train or it's a mix between train and tram. You take it up to the hill. For me, visually it's a hill, but we call it mountain. It's the Uetliberg. So you take the train to the final stop, and then you have a great panoramic view of Zurich and also to the south. And now with the weather, you see really, really far.
Okay.
And if you fancy, take a walk for about 1.5 hours on top of the hill. There's a lovely restaurant, and then at the end you can take the cable car down to Adliswil, and I think cable car is highly associated with mountains, so you don't even have to go to central Switzerland to have a mountain feeling.
That's very nice. You will have to send me the links or the locations of those, and I will put them in the show notes.
Yes, and also people can reach out to me, because I was actually thinking of putting a Notion page together with some recommendation.
Nice. Well,
with hotels and restaurants.
And I will be very happy to share that.
Yeah. And if someone's coming in summer, please take a bath in the Lake of Zurich. We have many public swim baths that are attached to the lake. And the water is that clean that you actually can drink it out of the lake.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay, nice.
And out of the river. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You don't need to be afraid.
Nice. Where people can reach you if they want? If
they want to chat with me in English.
In English or in German.
Then it's Twitter, Natasha Buck, Buck. Or if you would like to get in touch with me over my website, it's natashabuck.com.
Okay, perfect. I will put all the links.
Thank you.
Thank you for this. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot for listening to this episode until the end. After our recording, Natasha took me on a tour of Zurich Center. That was very nice. And even if I only spent an afternoon in Zurich, in the end, meeting with a local allowed me to really get a good feeling of the city. So really, thanks for that, Natasha. I even had a chance to taste some local meals at a restaurant that she picked. And it was like an old medieval tavern that I really enjoyed. Perfect to taste a good local beer and some sausages before my night train. Actually, the night train was quite amazing. It was the night jet to Vienna. And if you have a chance, I would totally recommend to splurge on the solo cabins of the night jet. It's almost like a hotel on rails. Well, a tiny hotel, but still get a small feeling like that. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to meet any more no-coders along the way, even if I had some meetings arranged. I got ghosted, actually, which didn't feel great, but that's part of the game, I guess. And while I would have totally skipped Vienna if it wasn't for that meeting, I always love going to Prague, so that doesn't matter. It's definitely one of my favorite cities in Europe. Well, this is it. It's the end of this very short second season, but don't worry, I have more trips planned for 2022. Take care and safe travels until next time.